Good day, ladies and gentlemen. For those who don't know me, my name is Abigail Murray. I am the Associate for Enterprise Development at the Saldanha Bay IDZ. A warm and hearty welcome to the 4th Togazi talk session. Togazi stands for Talks on the Oil and Gas Industry, and it aims to educate on the oil and gas industry. Benny will do a short recap on previous sessions on her talks. And with the Togazi, we wish to inspire small businesses to ready themselves for this industry in terms of compliance, registrations, linkages, etc. The IDZ Enterprise Development Unit is there to support you in acquiring these compliances and developments of the small business. And introducing our guest speaker, I normally tell Benedicta after each and every session how proud I am of her and inspired by her talks. So without further ado, I introduce to you our executive for the Ease of Doing Business, Benedicta Mahlangu. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Abby, for that introduction. For those who are joining us for the first time this morning on these Togazi series, my name is Benedicta Mahlangu, as Abby has mentioned, and I'm the executive for the Ease of Doing Business at the Saldanha Bay IDZ licensing company. Today our topic covers life offshore, and I will also be answering the questions that have been posed on the survey that goes out after each of the Togazi series, where people can ask questions, make comments. We have got very few questions, but I thought I would take them as is from the survey and give a formal answer to those who are present, and in order to allow for more conversation and dialogue to take place going forward. My background is a little bit linked to the water side. I'm born and raised in Durban and have always enjoyed the seaborne trades. I have an affinity towards the marine, maritime, and later on the oil and gas industry. My background is in chemical engineering. I moved to study in Cape Town, and in my second year received a scholarship to go to Germany. And it was there that I realized the world of opportunities that lies out there for the engineering field. And it is on this premise that I would like to have shared my experiences with the Saldanha Bay community, business community, in order to allow for people to also see the world of possibilities that lie within this oil and gas services industry that the Saldanha Bay IDZ is embarking on. I spent about 7 years working in the offshore exploration and basically have experience with working at sea, which is what I talk about today, the more lighter side of things, as well as in the previous sessions where I've covered the hard work and the elements that make up the offshore industry. I've also spent 2 years in the maritime industry, so I have exposure to shipping, port activities, and the combination of this oil and gas knowledge as well as shipping and marine is what leads to the role of designing and implementing a model that we can use as Saldanha Bay IDZ for ease of doing business for both investors and customers of the zone in order to make this a great success for the West Coast community. We are exactly halfway through the Togazi series. I do appreciate those who come every single month. We have these sessions every second Thursday of the month. And those who've joined in when they can, we also do appreciate that and hope that people take the learnings from these series, are able to utilize the presentations that we send on, the links to some of the videos, and spread on the word, because this is to educate and inform the community about the oil and gas industry. To give a brief recap for the benefits of those who have not attended, we started out with the introduction to the oil and gas industry, which covered the origins of crude oil and how it gets to become petrol in our cars and other everyday usage. We looked at the generic overview of what the oil and gas industry comprises of, from topside to subsea equipment. And in series 2, we covered the components of the offshore industry, which was going into the details of the different types of rigs and vessels that are found out at sea, as well as going into what we call the topside structures, which is what is visible to the human eye, and the subsea network where the actual operations take place out at sea. Last month, we looked at jobs offshore, and I stressed the importance of safety as the paramount importance for anyone to even leave land and be able to step into the offshore realm. And we looked at the career progression from someone who is just have a matric and how they can work themselves up to being a driller and a tool pusher, as well as some of the more skilled and professional roles found on the rigs and the supporting roles of the crew that support the engineering and operational activities that take place. Coming back to life offshore, this session, I want to go into almost what you would call the softer side of working offshore, and it's actually a privilege and an honor to be able to share this with an audience such as yourselves, because in the many years that I did work offshore, the question that I was often asked was, how do you survive being out at sea for so long? How do you survive being away from family? Don't you miss normal everyday life? And the answer was no, because we worked hard and we played hard when we were out at sea, as you shall see in some of my images that I will be sharing with you. The offshore industry, just in totality, in fact, in spreading all the way through oil and gas sector, because even in some downstream you get, in some instances, the same setup, is made up of rotations. So depending on the type of contract that you have, you would have something like 28 days on, 28 days off. That's how it's named, or 5 weeks on, 5 weeks off. And all that means is the on is when you're actually offshore and on duty, and off is your days off. And in some contracts, you'll find if people, for example, who live in Houston in the US, which is right near the Gulf of Mexico, they would have more of local contracts. So they worked even as shorter periods as 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. And with these rotations, you have two crews which mirror each other. So when the other crew is on duty, the other team is off, and they're basically at home. And how it swaps out is you have your direct back-to-back. And oftentimes, if your back-to-back couldn't make it for visa reasons, family reasons, you couldn't leave the platform or the vessel, because then there's a gap in the role. And I'll go into that with how the roles are very demarcated. And when you're on duty, so that is when you're actually offshore, we would have 12-hour shifts. So again, then within the crew, you've got back-to-back shifts. So what I do in my 12 hours, say our shifts ran midday to midnight or midnight to midday. So when I'm sleeping, someone is awake and doing up and doing work, and so forth, and back and forth. And when you do go offshore, you are working. There's no public holidays, there's no Sunday off, you just work. So if your rotation is 28 days, from the time you hit the rig and you go into your shift, you are working for 28 days flat, 12-hour shifts. So it's a very, mentally, you need to be very strong mentally to survive that. And that's actually where you start to see people who would only make it a year or two and can't continue. And those who make it to 7 years like I did are obviously a bit crazy. So there's a lot of, it's a strenuous job, it's a mental, in my role, there's a lot of thinking, a lot of troubleshooting. So to last through that many weeks can really take its toll on you. But the good side is that I only work 6 months of the year, because if you only 28 days on, 28 days off, therefore your time off is really your time off. And I used it to travel and do other things. You can be home. People with families tend to find it easier to have more quality time with their families, because when so you find the people who work offshore, they like it because they feel if you work 9 to 5, in the evening, sometimes you haven't switched off from work. But when you're off for 28 days, you can play with the kids, you can go on holidays, you can really be involved and be present, which is a plus in terms of this kind of rotation lifestyle. It's a very high pressure and intense, as I mentioned. You work, and you're continuously working. The roles, as I mentioned, are demarcated. So if you didn't do a particular activity which is under your assignment or your responsibilities, then it's not done. So there's no, so which drives a very different culture of working, in that everyone's accountable for what they do, for themselves and for their team. Teamwork is necessary for survival, because you really are just there on your own with your team members. And if something breaks, sometimes you lend yourself to other skills you may have. Some people like handling with computers, so if one broke, they enjoy taking computers apart. Some people enjoy fixing carpentry, and you know, so they lend themselves to those things. So it's also a great place to develop a lot of extra hobbies, because there's that space that allows for you to offer more of your expertise and capabilities than just your core role, which is also great in terms of just building character and strength and your capabilities. Crew changes, it's by helicopter. Most of the offshore platforms, they are quite a distance from the land shore side, and really the fastest and safest, believe it or not, way to get to offshore installations is by helicopter. And the safety is of paramount importance before you go. So for example, if I was commuting to work, it would be, because I was from Durban, I was making an example of this to my colleagues, how when I did a project in Alaska, I connected so many times, because I would fly from Durban to Johannesburg, Johannesburg to Atlanta, Atlanta to Seattle, Seattle to Anchorage in Alaska. And once I'm there, we often have a night break, where you stay overnight in a hotel just to obviously acclimatize to the time zone changes and rest. And then very early in the morning, usually we'd get the helicopter runs going offshore. And some of those trips can be as long as an hour. It depends on the range of how far that you need to travel. So that is how we got to work. So I often used to say, instead of me getting into a car and driving to work, I basically connect a whole lot of aircraft to get to work. In some instances or cases, this crew change is a picture of mine when we had to crew change. We actually did this was on a seismic exploration trip in the north of Alaska in the Arctic. So the range for the helicopter couldn't reach where we are, so we actually had to use a supply. One of the, I think I covered in series 2 about the platform supply vessels. Sometimes those can be used for crew changes as well if need be. And this particular one was an icebreaker. As you can see, some of the ice floating on the side there. We literally were working in the Arctic, and the only way to get home was through the supply vessels. So in some instances, getting home is also a bit of an adventure in itself. And people who've worked in Africa, especially in some of the West African countries, will tell you stories also of how they had to wade through a jungle because they went down a river. It's very interesting stories how you get to work and back home. I'll just share some of my images. As I mentioned, offshore we work hard and we play hard. I just want to show the contrast compared to some of the previous sessions with the hard, intense work, the long hours that you do, that you can imagine in a 12, so you've got in a 24-hour day, 12 hours you are working on your shift. You've got 12 hours on the other side, which is free to you. If you're averaging sleeps between 6 and 8 hours, you have anything between 4 and 6 hours free. You have no chores, you don't need to be anywhere. You have no responsibility to anybody, it's just your free time. 4 hours is a long time when you have actually no real responsibility to use that time for, whereas normally in a 9 to 5, maybe you have to cook, you have to look after the children, you have to perhaps even continue with your work. For us, a shift ends, it's handover, you close the door in the control room and off you go. And there's a very clear demarcation. Your shift has ended. Except in severe or emergency situations, we may overlap. There has been times where we would work around the clock, 18 hours, because there wasn't a serious emergency and we were all pulling in together and need more hands. But those were more the anomalies. So as a result, we use the heli deck a lot for a lot of our sporting activities, such as playing basketball. We also used to plan, we have a welfare committee on board, so we used to plan events, and this was an Angels and Demons party, which is basically, as you can see, using some of our hand tools. So we have fun with our working area. More images of just some times at work. The other great thing is how much we would celebrate festivities. So Christmas is a big deal, New Year's is a big deal, Easter is a big deal, any Eid is a big deal. So there's always a consideration for the fact that you've got different cultures and different people from different parts of the world, and we just all come together and we celebrate that. And in a sense, that creates the family. So when people would ask me, don't I miss my family? Yes, I miss my biological family, but I had an offshore family. And till this day, if any of them happen to be in South Africa, they can easily call me up. We meet up for a drink, and it's really just, pick up where we left off. Likewise, also, I can travel almost to most parts of the world, and I know somebody, or they can link me up to someone else. And it just creates such a great, almost like I have this universal family. And also, we used to like having these music. So we actually had a music room. There's a lot of people, like I mentioned, with their hobbies. Some people would have come and never having played a guitar or piano or drums, and because those were on offer on board, they learn. People teach you. We used to sing. I enjoy singing, so we often used to have spare time. Someone's playing the guitar, we're singing along. And we had done a rock concert. You can see all the work and boxes behind the area. So I wanted to just bring the lighter side of working offshore and how it is that even just myself, as a female especially, where people would be concerned, I could survive it. Or survive it in inverted commas, because it wasn't really survival. I did enjoy being there. My contract was called the International Commuter Contract. And as I mentioned, so my commuting, instead of getting into a car and driving to work every morning and every evening, I fly halfway across the globe and then get to work and fly halfway across the globe back home again. The part that draws also people to the offshore industry, apart from the fiscus and the financial benefits, is generally, I used to find, it's generally people who love people, who enjoy working in different parts of the world, mingling with different cultures, who also have a little bit of an adrenaline junkie to them, because most people who work offshore, they're not afraid. So whereas someone would ask, I have stories of real danger situations that we were exposed to, but in any of them, I was never afraid. There wasn't that thing. And I used to find that most of the crews that I was in, you never had someone suddenly screaming and freaking out in a situation. Most people would actually gather together and you find the solution. So the other thing I've been very fortunate with is that I've worked in most producing areas. So I've been exposed, for example, I'll just list some of them. So I've worked in Alaska, which is Arctic, so the conditions are different there. I've worked in the Gulf of Mexico, which is also almost just the largest traffic of rigs you can find. Some of them have dried up because there's no more crude oil to drill all there. The Atlantic Ocean, which is basically offshore West Africa, and you get to know a bit about the culture of the country whose offshore waters you're working in as well, because part of your crew might be people from the particular country. In the North Sea, and although the North Sea, people sometimes only kind of link it to the UK or Norway, it depends where your project is coming from. And depending if the project is coming from Norway or Denmark or UK, it's very different conditions, because the legislation of those individual countries determine the project and how things run, how crew changes run, and various other things, as well as some other parts of Australia and Asia that I worked in. I also have been to similar zones as what we are wanting to construct for the Saldanha Bay IDZ, which is repair centers. I've been into dry docks around the globe. So I have been exposed, although from a different side of things as I would be in this case, to some of the operations that are involved with going into a repair and service center. And I even had been to South Africa as well. In fact, South Africa is really, it is quite a good area for the changeover between jobs coming from, say, the east side coming into the West Africa, or moving from the Americas or South America coming into West Africa, or going into the North Sea. So we are very strategically positioned to capture the rigs that pass through our coastal waters. And that's why we really do believe that this project would work. And the rigs would come here because they already pass by here. We only just need to make sure that it is attractive enough for them to want to actually come into the zone and do their maintenance and repair. I'll just give also again a few imagery of what, so I just spoke about almost more of the lifestyle, what living there looks like, and now just some images of some of the setup. And starting with the cabins, not the greatest, that image looks exactly like the cabin I used to live in with those curtains. So it's a very basic setup, bunk bed, desk, chair, but it doesn't matter. In a shower, all of them have a shower en suite. It doesn't matter because all you're doing in your cabin is you're sleeping, getting dressed, showered and getting dressed. That is it. The rest of the time you are spending eating. So we spend, eating is almost I guess it's the same also if you're in a 9-to-5 job. A lot of socialization is around food and drinks. It's the same offshore, only it's in our small dining hall. This image was taken, it was the Easter in 2012. And the chefs, they love when we have, the Christmases and the New Year's, and they can show off their culinary skills, give us the food arts, and we basically eat till we can no longer eat. So that was just one of the images just to show the level of how spoiled we would be. And I've mentioned again also in the previous series how you can imagine if this is the sort of treatment, just for something as small as food, that the crews receive. They almost expect the same in the repair centers that they go into as well. So there is really a big push that we're trying to also introduce of just the level. Don't look at the rustic steel frame and think it's all just dirty and dirty people. Some of the things actually they do expect high quality service and offerings. Gymming and exercise. There actually was a system. It was called it's safety and health point system. So each rotation, or for example, each time I'm offshore in a crew, the medic on board designs for that trip some kind of exercise or competition. So you might have like a boot camp that runs. It might be interdepartmental competitions where how far have you rowed, because you clock in on the rowing machine, because we had an actual gym inside. We used to do on nice sunny days. We use the helideck a lot to do some of circuit training or those Ironman sort of things. So they also try to bring in, because you need your crew to be physically fit and healthy, also just for the mental stimulation. And also there's less inclination for, I think, injury. For example, in the 7 years I worked, I think only twice was I actually sick. In 7 years, only twice do I remember being sick while offshore, because your immune system is actually boosted. We used to have vitamins, with our meals. There's a very strong sense of keeping your mind and body active and healthy. We also used to do a lot of interdepartmental games. This was a football tournament, and it would get very heated. And as you can see, the three ladies, it's myself and two other ladies, those were the three ladies on the crew. That's us, that's it. So often you'd find that the females actually on the cruise, that some of the guys start to enjoy having females on the cruise, because we do bring the more lighter side. So we always were willing to organize the tournaments or procure to decorate the accommodation area for Christmas and vice versa. Also, these are the games we would play. One of the things I never actually knew is how much you can do on a helideck. That ball, if you see in the picture to the right, it's not very clear perhaps, that ball is actually tied to a string. So of course you cannot throw a ball on the shore because it's going to go overboard. So we found ways of playing games, cricket, volleyball, and all kinds of ball games you can think of. We thought, obviously it's a bunch of engineers, how you can do this without polluting the environment, which is if your ball fell overboard. So it actually became fun, even just designing some of these games and contraptions for us to have the fun. To bring us back to just some of the, I would say, more burning questions that have come through the survey. As I mentioned, after every Togasi series, we often post a post survey which contains the presentation. Just to again reiterate that there's a link to the presentation that I provide, so that people can actually have a look at it again, because in some instances it may be you need to reread the information given. There was links to the videos that were played, especially in the first 3 series, just that demonstrate how the work takes place. And within the survey, we also had questions just to rate how the Togasi is being presented, if it's useful for you, what else you would like to see happen. And in there were questions we posed by the community to ask us, and I'm going to go into those now. So I've divided them up as they came through from series 1, 2, and 3. First question is, this is always obviously a popular one. When can we expect the oil and gas project to be in process? I didn't add the other questions. Some of the questions were similar. The other one linked to this was, how long before the oil and gas will be in process in Saldanha Bay? The simple answer is, once the infrastructure is ready. We need the infrastructure for the investors to be able to come and set up, and then you can operate. And just to elaborate for perhaps those who may not be aware, the construction is already in progress from Transnet in the port for the offshore supply base. And the plans are in progress for the berth 205, which would be a dedicated berth for the rigs, and a 500-meter jetty that can also be used to take up some of the jackup and launching of some vessels. And the reason I've just put that in a different color is that that is something, so the project is worked jointly with Transnet, so those are within their jurisdiction. And when it comes to us, we have a tender that was awarded in April, and construction works as we speak for internal services. If you look at the industrial, for those who don't know where that is, but the Saldanha Industrial Park is what we call our back of port land. There is already work that has begun in there to get us ready. Having said that, in the meantime, we do need the skills and the enterprise development to be also tracking along with the infrastructure, so that when the buildings or the investors or the customers are ready to operate, so is the community or the business community of the West Coast to be able to partake in the zone. So the two work hand in hand. On the one hand, you've got the infrastructure, but on the other hand, we need the skills and the ability to partake and service the industry. The next question was, presentation very informative. I would like to find out possibility of partnering as an organization to disseminate this information to our school-going community members to spark an interest in career disciplines in this regard, from early childhood all the way to our FET phase. Yes, this possibility is in the pipeline also. The current program, so this obviously is our first year running Togasi, and it has been designed for a more mature audience. I'm not saying that this is, but it was targeted at the business community and some of our stakeholders to be able to introduce and be able to see how it's being received. However, we definitely do know that the people who also needed more than even perhaps some of the business community is the colleges and schools, and we are in the process of anticipating to roll out a program during 2016 that would be then designed for them. Because the way I would be delivering the message to a younger audience or the school-going pupils is very different to how I would need to deliver it for a more business audience and more, some of the stakeholders' audience. And that's the reason that it's been split that way. And of course, we're more than happy to assist during this year if there are any requests for any kind of disseminating of this information in the current year while we wait for a more structured program during 2016. How is the interest of local business, the West Coast region, and then the interest of greater South Africa community going to be protected from international business? This is a good question, but also a very broad one. The IDZs, they come from they are a national government into working with provincial and the municipalities for uplifting those particular areas and those communities. So there really is a lot of work going into legislation, policies and procedures to ensure that where these pockets of the industrial zones are situated, the surrounding community has the maximum benefit. And that's why there are a couple of IDZs around the country, and the SEZ program that has been rolled out also to expand into even more, capturing other areas to provide that local uptake in those areas. The other way in which basically to make sure that we protect the businesses locally is through the enterprise development programs that the Saldanha Bay IDZ is embarking on. So such initiatives as the Togasi, the West Coast community is having first-hand almost an advantage of being coached and being taught and being brought into a clearer understanding of what the sector is about, which Johannesburg, Durban, Northern Cape doesn't have. So already by virtue of being in the West Coast, the community sits at an advantage to being almost first in line to being able to partake in the establishment and being a partaker of it. And some of the other initiatives that we've had, there was a supplier awareness days. We are aware that people, some of them need more coaching with how to become, to basically be able to tender for the contracts or how to be a player in the supplying both us and maybe later on into the zone. And those are continually being worked on, and they are purely designed to ensure that the local business interest is protected. There's programs under our skills program where there will be 650 trained artisans through a fund which we have applied for to allow us to train local pupils and young learners through an SEZ and MOSITA fund. And also there will be even a further 500 trained artisans through a DTI fund. So in essence, how do we protect the local interests? Through these initiatives. And we need to also partner up with the community to see that by virtue of being in the West Coast, you already sit at an advantage in relation to the rest of South Africa. And also, we are giving you information that puts you in a competitive arena advantage with the international businesses. So that is the way in which we are trying to assist as best as we can. What guarantees are there that small business will benefit from this opportunity, and who will make sure of that? Again, some of them, they may seem repetitive, but I did want to give due diligence to answer each one specifically, especially if someone who asked the question is in the audience. I want to honor and respect the fact that they did pose the question. The Saldanha Bay IDZ is mandated to ensure that there is a conducive environment between the SMMEs and enterprises found in the area to operate and thrive. That is really our job, is to ensure that the businesses are assisted as much as is possible to be ready to benefit. And these are through our enterprise development initiatives, which Abigail is the person, which is why she even introduces Togasi and speaks of that unit, because we understand that the audience is from business community, and some of them are SMMEs that require that assistance. And that is how then that allows the platform to be able to access and benefit from the opportunities which are represented by the sector. And also so that's the one part of answering it, because some of these questions are quite broad. There's lots of different facets to it. The other thing to also remember is that the oil and gas industry, it requires a multitude of services, and from different size industries, and also from different locations. So the pie, in essence, is big enough to really try and fit everybody in and find their space. And perhaps at the beginning you could find that some of the goods need to be procured internationally because they're not yet, the businesses here are not yet ready to be able to provide them. But that's why we have enterprise development and programs in place to get the local businesses ultimately to be able to trade themselves also directly with these international investors. And also to be able to stand almost that chance. I mean, most people here are also business people, and what everyone looks for is good service. You want to have good service, you want to have the efficiency, you want to have it well priced, so that they also are businesses. So just to also keep that in mind, in that we want to provide, we must be able to offer that world-class service and goods comparable to the rest of the world, and in that effect you would find the shift slowly coming into that there's more use of the West Coast businesses into the zone. Will the Saldanha Bay IDZ have a negative effect on the sea streams, especially near the coastal areas? This question was initially posed as, will Togasi have a negative effect? I've changed it to Saldanha Bay IDZ because I think that's what the question was alluding to. But also it made me think that perhaps I may have confused matters with talking in the first two Togasis about offshore and drilling and the kind of operations that take place at sea. So no, our operations will not, because we are not drilling, we're not in exploration activities. There will not be crude oil seeping from the port, from the rigs that come. There isn't really minimal impact with regards to the waters. The rigs are coming for service. And what you find most of the time, the parts or the modules that need refitting, they're taken off and go into a workshop and repair area and refit it back in, and maybe even some of the chipping and painting that takes place. So some of the work that takes place that has any kind of emissions, those companies, they work under a roof. It's a standard. And the other thing to stress, especially when we speak on environmental factors, is the fact that most of the oil and gas sector players are really hammered with regards to environmental impact. So without us even necessarily intervening, although we have our own strict environmental measurements, they themselves operate in a very environmentally safe manner. It just is an industry standard because of obviously previous incidences, and it's a global movement. So you'll find that the rules, that such I mentioned in Togasi 3, the standards will be across board for how people operate and how they work safely for personnel as well as the environment. How would our small business who manufacture workwear and shirts benefit? I liked this question because it was specific, and that's why I can actually give a specific answer, which was this is an industrial zone. So first up, you're going to need coveralls. Almost all the investors or the kind of work that takes place in there would be some need or another for workwear, which is the PPE, the personal protective equipment. So there would be coveralls to be made. If you have a logistics house, they may need to want to have maybe branded shirts so they have a uniform. Even canteen and cleaning staff may need to have a particular uniform made for them. So that's how a business that manufactures workwear can actually be able to become an active participant and supplier within the businesses in the zone. And the follow-up question that I added in there, because then again in a more generic sense, how will local suppliers benefit? So the SMEs and enterprises that are manufacturing and or providing services, they register on our Saldanha Bay supplier database. Some people have already registered on the supplier base, and we really are in the process of working it to make it very easy for the investor when they eventually come to work with. They can see this is the business, what they do, this is the perhaps previous project, the expertise, and from our end we can also see where the gaps might be in order to be able to be of support to close some of those gaps. And the other thing also then is that the SMEs need to comply with the industry regulatory and compliance requirements. And Abigail mentioned in her introduction that we are here to do that. We are here to support the businesses who perhaps fall short of some of those, and just in terms of advice and various initiatives. But the businesses as well themselves need to be aware that to become a player, there are these safety and certifications and accreditation requirements necessary. From series 2, we had just these two questions. First one being training of the local business EMEs on how to get tendering in the project and the assistance to get paperwork required. Again, just tying to my previous answer, we are in discussions with partners such as the Department of Trade and Industry and CEDA to ensure, which is a small enterprise development agency, to ensure that there is collaborative work provided, so there is that support. Some of this we as the Saldanha Bay IDZ cannot do on our own, and so we acknowledge that and we partner. So we're brokering on behalf of the community with the agencies to provide that assistance because that is their core mandate. And in that way to meet the industry standards and regulatory and compliance requirements. The second question was how will the empowerment or linkage of small business with big or international companies will be done and how the process will work. We, as a Saldanha Bay IDZ, are the facilitator. So, for example, we enable those enterprises to access the markets. And by access the markets, as in the markets in the zone, which some of them are international, some even local. And through our enterprise development, the supplier database, we are able to then create almost a catalog for an investor with the products and services that can be found locally. So that is how then the process would work. And also the idea is not that we hold the business's hands all the way through to the end. It is that somewhere in the growth curve, it gets to a point where business actually is confident and really established themselves enough to directly interact with some of those international investors themselves. And that really is our goal, is that of course, in the beginning, we all need to work together, to get the cogwheels moving. But ultimately, it is that then, we set the businesses free and they can thrive and they can go forth by themselves and grow their own businesses, establish their own relationships, and find out even what else does your investor require that, we can add to give you that good international world-class service. From Series 3, the questions were, is there a possibility that the fishermen can get opportunities given their limited educational background? I loved this question because I've spent a lot of time in Norway, and one of the most incredible things is the fact that Norway used to be a fishing community, and some parts still are. Some parts look like Saldanha Bay in the sense that you've got the little boats in the water, but it's a thriving economy because of the big oil and gas boom. They have a similar zone as what we will be having ourselves, where they do maintenance and repair to the rigs and have the logistic support, using the SMMEs also in that region. So, it takes time. So over the last 40 odd years, maybe more, they've grown into one of the biggest players in the oil and gas sector. But I can assure you, they too probably went through exactly what the West Coast community is going through at this stage, where there is some doubts. We're not sure where it's going to end up. We're not sure how we will be real players in the area. But you keep moving and you keep going at it, and we keep having sessions such as Togasi. We keep asking people to post questions. We keep asking people to register on a supplier database and so forth. That way that we can mold and shape the West Coast and Saldanha Bay municipality and the port to also become ports such as Bergen in Norway. And I do believe that the West Coast too can become like some of the really wealthy and well-established cities that you find across the globe. But particularly, I make an example with Norway, because Norway used to be a fishing community as well. The other question, I did laugh, but it was actually and that's why my answer is a valid point. Why must every time we go back, if you snooze, you lose? The last presentation was about 20 minutes, 30 minutes was spent on previous presentations. That is a valid point, and bad behavior should not be rewarded. And I do it because at each event, usually, because we have, obviously we can see who's been coming to all the sessions and who's new. So most often than not, there's half or sometimes more than half the people who are at the particular Togasi series were not at the previous one, or it's their very first one. So I do go back to recap just to show, kind of give a bit of context. Today I obviously went faster, but it's just to give context to how this has built up to the topic that you might find yourself in today. And that brings us actually to the end of Togasi Series 4, and we have very exciting Togasi Series 5 and 6 coming up, where it won't only just be me talking here, but actually we will be involving the community as well in presenting those series, because now we start looking into what I guess has, as we can see from the questions, is what's burning up in everybody's mind is, how do we participate? How do we make sure we benefit? What do we need to do? So during Togasi 5 and 6, I hope to be able to answer some of those questions. The remaining ones for Togasi Series 5 is repair and fabrication work, which is what kind of work takes place in a repair and fabrication facility. And it's elaborating on the repair and fabrication work that takes place in the zones of Saldanha Bay IDZ. That's the inscription. And for Togasi Series 6, it says supply value chain. Who forms part of the oil and gas value chain? And what is required in the way to procure these components that will make the Saldanha Bay IDZ engine work? And the last one, which is Series 7, the future of the Saldanha Bay IDZ in collaboration with the Saldanha Bay municipality. And basically, it is what good looks like and what is our vision and dream moving forward into the future. In closing, I would like to leave all of you with this. I found this saying actually very appropriate for just, obviously, you know, it's sometimes, you know, there's some heated debates around the Saldanha Bay IDZ in the infrastructure program. When are we starting? Will people benefit? Is you know, just to reignite some hope in the audience and perhaps those who get to receive the presentation as well. It's a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. And I, on behalf of the Saldanha Bay IDZ, plead with the West Coast community to please keep moving. Don't stop, keep moving. We may not be flying yet, but we'll get there. But because we're not flying at this stage doesn't mean we should be standing still. We keep moving forward and we'll get there. Thank you.
People, thank you very much for coming. There's such a lot to say in concluding the day's talk. I think, as always, I'm very encouraged by Benny's talks, and I feel inspired to go, you know, develop businesses going forward. And I think the fact that all of you are here is an encouragement to the IDZ that people are willing and hard at work in developing their businesses for this industry. We thank you so much for coming. And questions are normally done via electronically with the help of our marketing team. We are all still here. We want to welcome you to a cup of tea with us. All of us are here. If you have any other additional questions, we are here for you to engage with us going forward. And Graham, the last slide that Benny had was just an indication of what we've done with our previous sessions and what you can expect with the 5 and 6 and 7 Togazi sessions. We hope to see you back here next month. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you.